Hey everyone, we are thrilled to introduce you to a place very close to our heart, blushingintrovert.com, an online store of women's clothing and accessories that make the perfect gift. You see, they're passionate about spreading joy and promoting mental health awareness. Blushingintrovert.com carries cozy women's sweatshirts and quality accessories, tumblers, journals, handmade gifts, and stickers. It's the kind of comfort you'll find in their customer service as well. Everything is made by hand. Everything is in stock, ready to ship directly to your door. Women's accessories are carefully selected to bring out your inner confidence. Blushing Introvert isn't just a store, it's an extension of family. Inspired by the calling to give back, a portion of every purchase supports vital mental health initiatives. So your shopping experience with blushingintrovert.com truly makes a difference. So come check them out on either Etsy or at their online store at blushingintrovert.com and experience the warmth, love, and top-notch customer service at blushingintrovert.com, where fun meets fashion, mental health matters, and you're treated like family. Blushingintrovert.com, your happy place. Visit blushingintrovert.com today. Come join us as we dive deeper behind the scenes of security and cybercrime today, interviewing top technology leaders from around the world and sharing true cybercrime stories to raise awareness. From the creators of Vigilance, the newest global technology newsletter, translating cyber news into business language we all understand. So please help us keep this going by subscribing for free to our YouTube channel and downloading our podcast episodes on Apple and Spotify so we can continue to bring you more of what matters. This is Cybercrime Junkies, and now the show. Welcome, everybody, to Cybercrime Junkies. I'm your host, David Morrow. Hopefully, I'm not frozen on the screen. I've had several technical problems this afternoon. We are joined in the studio today by the none other but the top security researcher on the planet, John DiMaggio. John, welcome, sir. We're very excited about having you. No, you're always welcome here, sir. And always... What's the seat in the motorcycle right next to it? The little guy? The sidecar. Right in the sidecar of my chopper is Mark Mosher with a little helmet on.
Oh, absolutely. Dave, this is going to be such a good episode. If you guys have not listened to the past episode with John on here, I encourage you to go onto YouTube, go download our podcast from Spotify, iTunes, wherever you get them. These segments are priceless. This is such good stuff. You will not believe it. Buckle up, lace up them Nikes. We're about to move fast and move quick.
First and foremost, for those that might have not seen your work, they may not have your book up on their bookshelf like I do, John, and you're welcome. I take check. I am one of your biggest fans. So just explain everybody kind of what your role is there over at Analyst One.
Yeah, so my official title is I am the chief, I had to think for a second there, chief security strategist. And the reason I had to think about it is because at the end of the day, I consider myself to be a researcher, bad guy chaser, analyst, writer, sort of combined. But yeah, my job is basically to do research and to write about it. So I do a lot of direct engagements. I use fake personas. I try and get close to, these days, ransomware criminals, and I write about it. The first, I'd say, 14 years of my career were all spent on espionage, and the past 5 or 6 have all been ransomware. So that's funny how things change.
So that's phenomenal, and that is being an advocate against cybercrime is something that people don't always talk about when they think of cybersecurity. They think of cybersecurity.
No, I got to step in for a second. Ladies and gentlemen, he's selling himself short on this. Short of the cape in a big S on his chest, there are very few other people that are making a mark for the good guys in the betterment of our civilization when it comes to the internet and cybersecurity than John DiMaggio. So, sorry, I had to get that plug in there for you.
You guys are too good to me, but thank you. I really do appreciate that. But honestly, I mean, that is, one of the most rewarding parts of this job is I do feel like I make a difference with the work that I do and the results. It motivates me. And the long nights, last night I'm in my writing phase right now. Last night I was up, it was like 1 a.m. and I was still going. And it's just, these are one of the things that motivate me as I do. I feel like it makes a difference with the work when I see the results.
It does. Hey, when the bad guys use your picture as their avatar, they know your name, man.
Right. They do. They definitely do.
That's exactly right. What Mark is referencing for the listeners and the viewers who may not know John or know the history, first of all, for context, right? Like 30, 40 years ago, Johnny, when we were growing up, there were two different worlds. Like even 20 years ago, there were two different worlds. There was our regular world, the physical world, right? And then there were people using computers for stuff. It was like an electronic almost copy of what was going on. Right. But if that broke down, we could still do everything, right? It really never interrupted daily operations. And that's really changed. Like our whole lives in one way or another is hosted. It's connected online somewhere. And so, in the real world, in the physical world, right, we have police. We've got the FBI. We've got police. We have somebody causes trouble. Somebody rips you off. Somebody steals from you. Somebody breaks into your home. All of those things, we have places in our society in place, right? But here we are, people working remotely, people working from everywhere, from an airport, restaurant, cafe, and we all get online and there are no police, right? When we get online, we actually enter like their world. We enter the same world that cyber criminals live on. And it's a daunting task. And to have people like you as an advocate against cybercrime going undercover and doing this, it's really needed. Now, I'm not to say that, and you know this better than we do, but the U.S. federal and even state law enforcement, there are elements that get online and and flush out cyber criminals and things like that. But for the mass public, right, we aren't protected. And so we really look to a lot of people like you to kind of shine a light on the dark web. And
well, thanks. I appreciate that. It's funny when you talk about law enforcement doing it. What a lot of people don't get is I work for a small company. I have my laptop. I don't have fancy tools. I don't have a crazy security budget. I use open source tools, my laptop, and I try to get creative. But it makes you work harder for it, you
make it look
work
good.
Harder.
And that's our goal in this podcast, because we don't have jack either. And we just make it look really, really shiny. That's the whole point.
Well, you guys do a good job.
That's kind of the whole point. So when you said you mentioned you worked for about 14 years in espionage, and your book, The Art of Cyber Warfare, which I do have on my shelf and which I read, which I proved to you when we first did this podcast. I had read it, and it was really good because part of it was kind of technical. Some of it was over my head, especially at that time. It was newer, and the other part was really interesting. It was all about like the story behind some of these breaches and the espionage.
That's the part I like the most, writing it.
It's so interesting. In what capacity did you used to work for the federal government? Did you work in private sector? What did you generally do? If you can't disclose it, just indicate so. But we're just
No. I was a SIGINT analyst. I worked for one of the intelligence agencies. So I did secret squirrel stuff. Honestly, my favorite part about doing that though was writing the reports. I've always enjoyed writing. The negative to that was like 5 people would get to read them. Right. But I got to do cool things that I don't get to talk about. But it was a fun job. I enjoyed it. It got to a point where I was just ready for something else, to change things up, which is why I joined the private sector. And I went to Symantec for 7 years. I worked on their attack investigation team, which most of the work we did was espionage related, and that's mainly what I did while I was there.
Interesting. And the espionage aspect to cybersecurity always fascinates me. When we did a segment, we did a segment on the series of breaches several years ago: the Anthem breach, the Office of Personnel Management, the Equifax breach, the Marriott Starwood Hotels breaches, and those would have been. I wanted to ask you about those because I just never have, and those were all major breaches with vast amounts of data taken, and they had financial information, they had healthcare information, they had credit information, as well as like travel and everything. If that were to be sold like all these other breaches that we read about every day in the news on the dark web, it would have been worth a lot of money, wouldn't it? Hey everyone, we are thrilled to introduce you to a place very close to our heart, blushingintrovert.com, an online store of women's clothing and accessories that make the perfect gift. You see, they're passionate about spreading joy and promoting mental health awareness. Blushingintrovert.com carries cozy women's sweatshirts and quality accessories, tumblers, journals, handmade gifts, and stickers. It's the kind of comfort you'll find in their customer service as well. Everything is made by hand. Everything is in stock, ready to ship directly to your door. Women's accessories are carefully selected to bring out your inner confidence. Blushing Introvert isn't just a store, it's an extension of family. Inspired by the calling to give back, a portion of every purchase supports vital mental health initiatives. So your shopping experience with blushingintrovert.com truly makes a difference. So come check them out on either Etsy or at their online store at blushingintrovert.com and experience the warmth, love, and top-notch customer service at blushingintrovert.com, where fun meets fashion, mental health matters, and you're treated like family. Blushingintrovert.com, your happy place. Visit blushingintrovert.com today.
It would, but it's actually a lot worse than that. So the first public report I ever wrote was for Symantec, and it was called the Black Vine Espionage Group, and it covered two of the breaches you just talked about, and that was Anthem and OPM. And at high level, what happened with that is that was a China-based nation-state sponsored attacker, and they popped Anthem and they popped OPM. Let's think about this. Anthem, at the time anyway, provided a lot of the healthcare coverage for federal employees. OPM stores all the records and does all of the investigations and background work to get top secret and secret clearances. So when you combine those two together, you have a hell of a lot of great information on essentially everybody in America that works with classified information. So you can make lists for entry in the country. You can make target lists for their espionage. You can make use data for blackmailing purposes. There's a lot of things. So in looking at that versus bad guys selling it, I think we would have been better off with bad guys selling it. Not that either of them would have been a good ending to that story, but for that one, I think a lot of people didn't know the big picture of what was actually happening with it from a public aspect.
Yeah, this happened, what was it, Mark, 9 years ago or so, I think?
Yeah, I think
2014, 2015. So even then, we weren't seeing data breaches and cybercrime gangs in the news like we are today.
Right, not like today.
Yeah, it wasn't as prolific then, obviously.
Yeah, and it was...
We're going to get to a point where there is no PII because everybody's information is going to be out there in one data dump or another.
Yeah.
Getting so crazy.
Yeah. Well, and that leads to another topic that I wanted to ask you about. But let's stay on the espionage piece. So, what boggles my mind about these breaches is these are breaches that normally when Lockbit or Black Hat or one of these gangs go and Black Cat, I meant to say, sorry. Yeah. When they go and they exfiltrate, fancy word for steal, when they steal a bunch of data, right? The first thing they do is they extort, they blackmail them. They say, pay X amount, millions of dollars by this date. Otherwise we're going to leak your data. And then they do, or they go to sell the data online. So that data has a value. Either, first of all, it seems like, correct me if I'm wrong, but the cybercrime gangs are first and foremost proud of their hit, Are they not? Like, they are the first ones to be like, we did this, like a big bombing. This terrorist group says, yes, we did it. We take responsibility. Yeah. These guys are the first ones to do this. And what I found in those, when I was just researching, I started researching them raw, like without other people's filters. And I was like, how come no cybercrime gangs are like, my insight was no different than what you found, what others found, but I was finding it on my own. And I'm like, why are no cybercrime gangs bragging about this? This is a massive hit.
Oh, for the Anthem.
Yeah, these are massive breaches. How is nobody taking claim to this? And then how come nobody sold it or demanded a ransom for it? Like, there was none of that.
And still haven't. For, at least for the
right. And it would be worth, from some of the reports I saw, you mentioned things, and there were some other reports even. I saw some indictments later came down against like 4 or 5 Chinese nationals that were part of the Chinese military. And
always nice to see that you were right years later when it
exactly right. And they're there like, we just discovered this, and we're like, oh, they've been saying this for like 4 or 5 years. But it's interesting how politics work. But they say that would have been worth billions of dollars, like several hundreds of millions of dollars, and nobody wanted it. So it shows you the value of that data was even beyond financial, right?
Yes. Yeah, it was absolutely what they could do with it, how they could repurpose it to better suit the government of China's stance in different aspects in the world, but also from intelligence value, just to get a sort of step up on us. I mean, even I would never visit there just because of that breach alone, knowing that my information was in there and think that I had a clearance and who I worked for and everything else. I just wouldn't risk it. And I think that there's a lot of people out there that might be in that situation and don't even know it, because let's think about it. The U.S. government's pretty big these days, and everybody gets a clearance nowadays. So maybe not to a certain level, but my point is that there's a lot of people that don't necessarily realize that. I think when they travel, that the data that they think was protected, if they were in the government or military with clearance back at that time, that it's all out the window. Somebody else has access to it.
Well, yeah, and that sets him up to be, a target or compromised, right? Like that's a scary thought.
Agree. I mean, yeah, it's tough, man, because in anywhere you travel nowadays, you have to, if you're in this line of work, you have to, worry about somebody in my hotel room. Am I going to connect to the network? People think I'm crazy because I bring a firewall with me when I go on travel, and I directly VPN back into my house, which is another firewall, so that all my traffic is going from a point-to-point connection through my own network. And I do things like that. And, but you have to be paranoid, because people do crazy things. Governments do crazy things. And when you see it every day, you can't just, be like, that'll never happen. They'll think of something you're not even thinking of. And you just don't want to end up a victim.
Yeah. And there was a lot of speculation about what the Chinese government or the Chinese military could do with that data. And they could do a lot of things. I mean, if this person in the federal government is at this level, they have access to this, they see this data that you want, right? Or they have this access, and their wife has cancer, their house is being foreclosed, they're traveling here, you could meet them, you could take care of all of their problems or a lot of their problems financially and turn them against the U.S. I mean, that was one aspect.
Yeah, I mean, and let's think about it. That's healthcare data. Let's say, it's something embarrassing. Right. Let's say somebody had an STD or something. They don't want that public, and you got some guy show up, at a restaurant or bar that you're at.
With a full file of all your stuff.
If you don't want this being made available to all your friends and family.
People think that only happens in the movies. People think that only happens in the movies.
It doesn't.
But it doesn't.
It doesn't only. No. There's a reason that when you have a clearance, you get polygraphed and background checked, and that's because they're worried you're going to get blackmailed, and it's because things like this happen.
Which is why Mark is not cleared.
Yeah, I don't mind being compromised. My credit score is like a 7.
Yeah, and
so I don't know what
he's got clearance to hit the bourbon trail down in Kentucky. He's got
Right.
clearance.
Well, I mean, I haven't been in that world now for a while, but yeah, I remember those days, and I'm happy to not have to deal with the headaches of polygraphs and all that other stuff. I mean, even if you don't have something to hide, they're just a pain in the ass to have somebody asking you all questions about your personal life.
Absolutely.
Yeah, no doubt.
Yep. So you brought up a really good point, and this is something I've been talking to a lot of people about, and that is there's so many data breaches, right? It's like I used to go onto the site like, have I been pwned, right? And like maybe there was one, right? Now I go on the site, there's like 17, and I don't even know any of the apps.
Right.
So my data's been sold to this guy, to this guy, to this guy, and then they get breached.
Right.
I'm like, holy, so much of our stuff is out there. To me, when selecting a company to work with, or selecting a lawyer to work with, or selecting a healthcare group, like, because it's still all commoditized, right? We can select who we do business with. And when doing it, it used to be, or it still is to a degree, but here's my question. At what point are we going to get to, we're not judging organizations by whether they've been breached, but we're judging them by how often they've been breached or how they handled the breach? Like, are we getting to that next evolution, do you think?
I definitely think how we handled, or how they handled the breach, even inadvertently, is something that's being looked at, because there are companies, there's some, I won't recall them out, but like in the volume 1 of the Ransomware Diaries, there's a big company that I called out because they sat there and lied, and they said that they weren't breached, and for like 3 months they said it, despite their name and data being posted on a data leak site by a threat actor. And then some of their customers were allegedly compromised because of that data being repurposed. And it's just I think that when the general public gets aware of those type of things happening in other companies, at least I would hope that would make a difference in if you want to work with them. At the end of the day, dollars do the talking, so maybe it doesn't. But I know from a consumer aspect, I definitely look at those things, and I won't give my business to those organizations, just even if they I wouldn't say handled it right, but something as small as like the sunglasses hub. I'm still upset that those bastards couldn't keep my information safe, and it's just my address. But you know what? My company spends a lot of money to have my address removed from all those databases that are out there. And then I have somebody like that who from years ago that I give my address to, they couldn't keep it, and now that data is out on the dark web. And fortunately, it's not my current address, but it's just the point.
Well,
it's like,
it makes you want to buy sunglasses elsewhere, right?
It does. Yes, just yesterday, last night, I have a family member that called me, and they'd gotten a notification from their healthcare provider, and it was part of the CLOP,
move it breach,
activity, yeah, and the provider was not even offering them
credit monitoring or
any. Yeah, credit, nothing. And I'm just like, how is that okay? I get that things happen, but how is it you're not? And I told her to call them, and she did, and they said, no, we're not going to do that. There was 9 million people involved, where we just can't, do something of that scope. Well, you know what? They sure wouldn't have my business moving forward. I just think we need to hold these companies to a higher level of integrity, and I just think that I get it. Breaches happen, and anybody can be hacked, but like you just said, how you handle it makes a difference in your path forward and whether I give you my business.
Well, and I almost think it's going to get to, like, some people are talking about like a rating scale to some degree, or some metric, because like when a breach happens, there's a difference between, okay, it's compromised, it's limited. Yes, this data was taken, but we were able to contain it after a certain part, and they were doing good things. They had certain measures in place, like they have an affirmative defense. They were doing things right, but like they have to be right 1,000 times. The criminals, it's an intervening criminal act.
Right.
If you think about the law and tort law, right? This is an intervening criminal act coming in to people that are doing best practices. You can blame the company to a degree, but not that much, because they were doing everything. So they handle it, they offer credit monitoring, and it goes away. Okay, that's fine. So I personally would still do business with that vendor or with them. Like, it's about risk. And so we still have to go with people that are taking risks seriously.
Agreed.
But then there's breaches that are in the news that you're like, holy cow, they weren't doing anything. Like, like a business that has a ton of confidential information.
Where they lied about it.
Yeah, they didn't have like regular monitoring. They didn't have any SOC or any like SIM. Like they weren't looking at all for any anomalies. They didn't care. So they weren't investing whatsoever in the beginning. And then how do they handle it afterward? They lie about it. They don't disclose it. They wait till the last minute.
Right.
Like that to me is a sign that needs to be like that. A light needs to be shined on that, because that to me is, we don't want to do business with them. Like,
well, and there's another angle here that you're also not thinking of. And again, I won't name the companies, but this is all out in the public right now because this just happened.
Texas Emotion.
There was a threat actor who had stolen data from company A. Company A was doing business with company B. Well, company C came in and bought that stolen data so that they could go to company B and say, hey, I might have messed up my letters here, but the company you're doing business with that's supposed to be, assisting you and protecting you isn't doing that. I have this data that you were breached and I have this data that was stolen from you. You should give us our business. And the reason that I have such an issue with that is, I get why people pay ransom payments, like companies pay ransom payments. That's sort of a necessity, like having to lose jobs, your customers' data, your livelihood. But when you're doing it for a business advantage and you're feeding that criminal ecosystem, I think there should be laws against that, and there's not. But I think that is extremely unethical. And there's a case that where it's been recently was talked about. But the fact is it happens a lot more than people realize.
So a company that wants to gain a competitive advantage will go and they'll pay the ransom essentially, or they'll buy the data.
They'll buy the stolen data.
Stolen
data.
They'll
buy the stolen data. Yeah.
Whoa. That is not something we have covered. That's really interesting.
Well, after the fact, I'll pass you the info and you guys can do it as you like.
Yeah, that's a rabbit hole. That's an ugly side of it. Wow.
Yeah.
So that raises a question. There's talk now in the news and in government about outlawing ransom payments. What are your thoughts about that? Do you think that could ever happen? I don't know that it'll ever happen. Like they're talking about it in the next couple years, implementing something like that. I mean, first of all, you can't pay ransom to like a company or a cybercrime gang that would violate OFAC. Like they can't be on a like terrorist watch list or a country that is, you can't make payments to North Korea, right? Like you're not allowed to in the US.
Yeah. This is what'll happen if they do that. It'll at face value be extremely painful. There's companies that'll probably go out of business. There's a lot of people that'll lose jobs. There'll be an initial drop in a lot of that activity, and we'll start to pat ourselves in the back. And then threat actors are going to start to say, oh, you don't want to pay? Let's start targeting high-profile targets and critical infrastructure because we have nothing to lose anymore. And you're going to start having much more significant, larger scale problems, maybe not at the same volume, but you're going to give them basically a reason to target it. Right now, they're not doing that because of what happened the first time that happened, like with Colonial Pipeline. And they backed off because there's so many other targets they can make money on. But when you take those targets away, they're not going to have anything to lose. So I'm not saying that there isn't pros and cons of that scenario. I do agree that if ransoms weren't paid, eventually ransomware would go away.
But something else would come up.
It would be
wouldn't something else come up?
Well, that's just it. Whether it's something else or whether they start to do things that are just far more severe to where you'll want to pay the ransom and the government will be kind of forced, have their hand forced. But yeah, of course, there's always something new that comes up in the threat landscape. When you're talking about defending against threats and everything else, there's always creative attackers that have some new thing we never thought of. But specific to ransomware, I don't think that will just solve the problem. I just think it will change the situation. Yeah,
to me, I would find it, it leads into the other thing I wanted to talk to you about, and that is the Black Hat made a new level of street cred. It seems
creative
when they breached a company, Meridian Link, they issued ransomware. They demanded a ransom. They weren't negotiating with them. Apparently they weren't paying the ransom. So they were threatening to leak the data, but then they went a step further. This was the first time that we've seen where they actually notified the SEC that the victim company did not notify within the 4-day new requirement.
It's why I love this job, because every time you think you've
gotta
seen everything,
love
you
it
just
in a
see
sense.
some
You're
crazy
like,
stuff
holy
happen.
cow.
Right. What do you do with that? I mean, they didn't do anything. That part of it wasn't illegal. Bettered their agenda. You know, it's crazy to me that they actually filed a complaint or notification with the SEC that this company wasn't being compliant. It's one of those things where you just don't expect that to happen. Like, a bad guy is going to create an account and go here and log and notify.
Can you see the analyst or the agent for the SEC when they got that? They like saw that, they're like,
right.
This is from like Black Cat. Like, this is Alpha V who filed this. Like, it's not like they give their name and their social and their.
Oh, I'm sure either way. I'm sure when it was first received, it was taken, they didn't realize that it was taken. Oh, well, they looked into it and, we might have something here. And then once that came out, it was probably like, what?
I know. Well, so it raises the question of, if they're going to that level, I can only imagine what's next. Like, FTC, like any regulatory agency that enforces a regulation on a business, notifying that regulatory agency can now be, I mean, I guess it could have always been a leverage tactic, but it really wasn't anything used that often.
It wasn't. I mean, it's really tough because, you want these companies to be compliant because they weren't reporting these things, and then it's affecting the consumer. And then at the same time, you don't want that same mechanism to be used to get companies to pay a ransomware bad guys so that the don't have to let people know. So again, that's why I go back to, I can understand that any company can be breached, but it's how you handle it. If you fully disclose, I get it's embarrassing. I get that it's going to hurt, but it's going to hurt a lot more when you lie and you don't tell people and you end up screwing over your customer base. And so somewhere in between, there needs to be an answer. Yeah, we don't want to make there be crazy regulations for notifications, but because companies don't always do the right thing, they do need to be held accountable. And on that, I know nothing about that particular company. I don't know how they handled the attack, so I won't comment on that. But what I will say is, for the companies that do lie about it, that do tell their customers nothing happened, they should be held accountable. That situation I just told you with that family member, in the notification letter they got, it said, we have your data was stolen, but we have no reason to believe that it's being used for fraudulent purposes. Well, what do you think it's going to be used for? Maybe because it was just stolen.
That's a bunch of crap. No one's gonna. It's like, $5,000 is missing from your safe at home, but we have no reason to believe that it's ever going to be spent. Like, no, they just take the cash to keep it in their house. Of course they're going to spend it. Right. I mean, come on. Like, of course they're going to use this data. They're going to sell the data. They're going to use it as a data point in a further breach. Like, it's used repeatedly, oftentimes by several different groups.
Right. Agree. And I also think that there should be, and beyond even just being forced to report when a breach happened, I think that just like this situation, there should be a bare minimum that if you lose people's PII, you have to give them, X amount of a year, 3 years, whatever it might be, of some sort of identity protection, so they can at least have a chance to be notified when these things start to happen, as opposed to having, these massive problems, can't get credit. It affects them buying things. Absolutely. It affects their businesses. Things like that. And so these companies are just like, oh, sorry, we're not going to do anything. Like, that's unacceptable.
Absolutely. And we see this a lot in education too. When schools get breached, and schools have been in the news a lot this year. And when schools get breached, it's really bad because most parents don't monitor their kids' credit. And so cyber criminals can take over that identity, use it for years. Right. And then later on find out, right? I mean, that's just it's just brutal,
and it's so weird to clean that up. I mean, it's ridiculous. So, yeah, that's a really bad way to start out. Your life is going from a teenager to a young adult to find out that
you have a foreclosed condo in Vegas. And you're like, what? I'm like, I'm in a,
Yeah.
I'm in,
And you owe, $100,000 in
yeah,
credit
I'm
card
graduating
debt.
from
Yeah.
high school in New Hampshire. Like, what are you talking about? Like, what,
Right.
why is that?
Right.
So yeah, that's
Right.
really tough. What, almost gets to a question of what should an organization have to report on when there's a breach? Like, to me, I look to find out, like I'll read through or find out somehow through Zoom info or other OSINT measures. Like, I want to find out what were they doing beforehand? What preventative levels? Like, to me, there's organizations that are trying some things, and they're at least they're trying. Nobody's really doing all the security layers they should most often, unless they're like an enterprise level. But even small businesses,
Right.
they need to be doing some things, and there's some of them you read about and you're like, they were doing nothing, like no user training. They were like doing it once a year.
Right.
There was like no endpoint detection. There was no visibility into the network. Like, they weren't really doing anything. And
Right.
so
Yeah.
they should be fined or should be hit like harder. Like you know, like
100%.
spending and prevention should, like, there was a lot of pushback, and a lot of people were like, well, we can't afford it. Yeah, you can. You couldn't afford IT support. You couldn't afford servers originally. You couldn't afford the cloud originally, but you eventually did it because it actually gives you a competitive advantage. It allows you to make more money, allows you to scale. There's ways to find a way to support it. You just have to make it important.
Yeah. The problem, though, is there is no mechanism there to hold them accountable
Right.
for it. So yeah, if they're not protecting, there's so many different levels of standards, not even standards, so many different levels of security posture that we see that companies have today, or lack of it. And once these breaches happen, again, it's the consumer that ends up being harmed. It's the people whose data that they were supposed to be protecting that ends up being harmed. So when you continue on with business as usual, and there is not a penalty, or there is no one to hold them accountable, there's no motivation for them to fix it outside of their public reputation being damaged. And clearly, like in this case with this medical organization I was talking about yesterday, sometimes they just don't care. So what do you do? I don't have an answer, but it's
I'm
why
surprised that
we're
happened
getting
from
our
a
butts
medical
kicked.
organization too. Kind of surprised.
Yeah, well, they said because it was 9 million people, and they said it was just too many. That it's just like they were treating it almost like it was an act of God type of thing. Like, this just happened, it's inevitable, nothing we can do about it. And maybe there'll be more that'll come out with that, because that just hit the news a few days ago, I believe, that the specifics on the company.
Well, there'll be a
So
massive class action. Maybe they're just saving their money up for that.
I hope so. They deserve it. They have no place being in when that's how they respond to these sort of things, especially when it's healthcare data, because that's not just your financial aspect. I mean, the financial aspect is in it as well, but those are your private personal records. I mean, we need to go back to using paper for medical records, I think, because nobody seems to be able to protect our data anymore. I wish I was in charge of protecting my own data. I would feel much safer about that than all these other organizations having it out there. It's just I have no control.
Well, we've actually talked to some people that are developing things like that. It's just that they're all in the startup phase, right? But they have like components and ways. Mark, do you remember the one company? I forgot his name, but it's in a prior episode. Please watch. Please pay attention to our prior episodes, because clearly I didn't. But it was really interesting because he was talking about how being able to encapsulate your own financial information, your own medical information, and you just provide people with, it's almost like a link, if you think about it, to it, but you are in control of it. And I'm like, that needs to be the norm. Like, that is brilliant.
Agree. And then, there's people that are going to say, oh, well, I don't know how to do that. But you know what? And that's why you need to learn how to do it. But don't worry. The companies that were already guarding your data don't know how to do it either. So you'll be okay. But I would much rather be able to be in control of my data that is out there, and I'm not, and that sucks, because I know I would do a better job of it, and then at least then if something happens, that's on me, not on
and it's almost
else.
less complicated. Like when security sometimes. I think it's driven by so many vendors. We tend to overcomplicate things, lots of acronyms, lots of bold claims like social engineering, solve shelves. You know what I mean? Like, you are always secure, and you buy this box and you're going to have it. And I'm like, what? Like, are you kidding me? Like, it is not the way that it works. It's not a product. Like, security is not a product. It's not going to happen that way. But but in so many ways, it can be simple. Like, when you think about, if you reverse some of it, right, and you keep a lot of it in a central location that you can control, and you block that from outside, there's a whole bunch of different ways for different segments of different types of data that you can really keep it protected. Tell me about what have you been focused on? What is your research? You and your team, you have a partner in crime there now, and she's been publishing some really good work too.
Yeah. So I worked with Anastasia on her last report, which she put out a couple weeks ago, where basically we were just doing some analysis on the trends with ransomware payments. I reached out and had a conversation with Lockbit, and they gave us a bunch of information on how business was going and some of the struggles they were having with their, what they'll call their partners, where you had a lot of really young, talented hackers that were committing ransomware crimes, but they weren't so experienced with negotiating, and therefore they had a lot of low-paying ransom payments because they
didn't know how to sell a car, or they didn't know how to buy a car, right?
Yeah. Correct. So in true Lockbit fashion, I always say that they're operational like a business. In true Lockbit fashion, he got everybody together, presented the problem, took a poll on some possible solutions, and then came up with a tiered structure on how to assess targets and what percentage of their revenue you are allowed to negotiate with.
Hang on.
Wow.
So hang on a minute. So for the listeners, let's evaluate what we just heard from Johnny.
Yeah, because my therapist would say there's
a lot to unpack here. So you, John DiMaggio, private citizen in the U.S., wearing a cape, you went undercover, or you went to the dark web, and you spoke to some of the most prolific, successful, powerful cybercrime gangs. Hey, how's your model going? How's business? How are your vendors? How's your team morale? How are sales? And they were like, well, Johnny, let me tell you. And they opened up to you, and they shared this with you. That is friggin' ridiculous.
I don't bother. I don't do the fake personas.
No, because they know who you are.
They're using my face, as their avatar. So I just talk to them. But he does call me Johnny. Yeah. We do have conversations very similar. They are usually friendly and professional, because at this point, there's no point in
they're not going after you. Okay. You're not even going after them. Right. You just you were kind of exposed who they were. They respected you for doing it, and there's a mutual You're not going to Russia anytime soon. You're not going to bump into them. They're not. We know they're not coming out. They're not coming here, right? Because as soon as they do, they'll be arrested. So it's more okay, from afar, you can have a professional working relationship. There's mutual respect there.
Yeah. That's what I did. I reached out and I told them. So prior to that, I had met, or we, Anastasia and I had met with some ransom negotiators, good guys, not bad ones, and talked about some of the problems and things that they were seeing. And so I thought it might be beneficial to have a conversation with Lockbit and say, hey, these are some of the struggles that we're seeing on our side. I'm pretty sure that if we're seeing this, there has to be something on your end that's either causing that or struggles you're seeing. There's got to be somewhere in the middle that we can meet. And, there's people out there who will be like, oh, well, you're helping support the ransomware ecosystem like that. Well, no, when companies are getting decimated, what I want to do is try to help facilitate the best possible solutions that I can. So when I have multiple negotiators telling me the same thing, the same problems are happening, I thought it would be worthwhile. So Anastasia has a good background in tracking cryptocurrency and things of that nature. I've got a background to doing direct engagements. So between the two of us, it made for a good pair, in addition to reaching out, talking, like I said, with these negotiators. So getting that information, and Lockbit shared a lot more with us back than I expected, to be honest with you.
Well, that's good, though. I think it's good. I mean,
right. It's good know if you're a negotiator what you're
Right.
going in with. If there's rules in place already to what they're going to be allowed to negotiate, if you come in way below that, the chances of that negotiation ending prematurely and that company just being basically out of luck in their data getting exposed, I think it's better to go in knowing that. From the same thing, from an adversary side, if they're going in and they know they can only ask for a certain amount and you have negotiators that don't know that, again, no one wins. Not that I want them to win, but no one wins in those situations. So the best case scenario is obviously to pay as little as possible to get your data back, but you also don't want to go in with the wrong approach and just have everything ripped out from under you and all your data is leaked on the internet, like we saw with, not saying that they did this, but like with Boeing, like, you know, that negotiation ended, their data got exposed.
Well, that wraps this up. Thanks for joining, everybody. Hope you got value out of digging deeper behind the scenes of security and cybercrime today. Please don't forget to help keep this going by subscribing free to our YouTube channel at Cybercrime Junkies Podcast, and download and enjoy all of our past episodes on Apple and Spotify podcasts so we can continue to bring you more of what matters. This is Cybercrime Junkies, and we thank you for joining us.